And now please help me welcome up our own wonderful Reverend Cathy.
Thank you. I love that song, David. I was imagining David singing that song to Luz, as a romantic song. I guess I better love you while I'm here. And I'm imagining Luz going, you damn well better. Our theme for May is Holy, Holy Uprising, as in holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y, and holy, H-O-L-Y. Holy, Holy Uprising, which seems most appropriate for these days and these times. And I feel so fortunate that we have a teaching and we have tools that help humanity evolve into a new paradigm of consciousness. And one of our core principles is that of creation, which reminds us that the physical universe is the manifest body of the one infinite reality. And the one infinite reality is more than the physical universe. So this creation is this expression of the one infinite reality. It's inherently good, and it's ever evolving toward greater expression of good. And we use the spiritual tools in our teaching to create and demonstrate more good in our lives, our centers, our communities, and in the world. And that's how we become a part of the holy, holy uprising. Our Centers for Spiritual Living's evolutionary vision statement states, we see a world in which each and every person lives in alignment with his or her highest spiritual principle, emphasizing unity with God and connection with each other, a world in which individually and collectively we're called to a higher state of consciousness and action. Well, Helen Keller once said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And as Dennis said, our topic this week is this adventure called life. If the definition of the word adventure includes the idea of risk and chance, we're invited to look at how and when we do take holy risks to evolve, and how often we welcome the opportunities to awaken to our own spiritual magnificence. Patty Henson offers this story. There were two seeds lying side by side in the fertile spring soil, and the first seed said, I want to grow. I want to send my roots deep into the soil beneath me, and I want to thrust my sprouts through the earth's crust high above me. I want to unfurl my tender buds like banners to announce the arrival of spring. I want to feel the warmth of the sun on my face and the blessing of the morning dew on my petals. And so she grew. The second seed said, I'm afraid. If I send my roots into the ground below, I don't know what I will encounter in the dark. And if I push my way up through the hard soil above me, I may damage my delicate sprouts. What if I let my buds open and a snail eats me? And if I were to open my blossoms, a small child may pull me from the ground. No, much better, I should stay safe. I'm just going to wait here until it's safe. And so she waited. She waited until a yard hen scratching around in the early spring ground for food found her and promptly ate her. The moral of the story? Those of us who refuse to risk and grow get swallowed up by life. By life, as Dennis would say. The word adventure has come to be associated with risk. However, the Latin root word, advenire, means to arrive. And our founder, this is just a little bit of trivia, our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, had a radio show in the 50s, which was titled Self-Reliance and Your Adventure, wherein he often proclaimed, God is our adventure. I believe that he meant that in truth, there's only one thing happening here, and that is intelligence coming into form. And we're wholly holy because this creative intelligence, source and substance, found in everything, comes into form by means of us. We know that science confirms that the universe responds to us, to the way we feel, to the way we think. And though we know on an intellectual level that we're creating our experiences of life, we often hold back from some experiences. We might do this because we fear failure or we fear the unknown. But we come to find out in this teaching is one of the biggest risks is not opening to our infinite possibilities. So finding God does become the adventure. And we arrive, I think, when we reach that understanding that God is our constant companion in this adventure called life. And more than that, God is really the architect that we consult as we take the risks involved in building a life of greater good. Dennis quoted two philosophers, and I'm going to quote one too, and that's Jerry Seinfeld. He's a philosopher. He said, according to most studies, people's number one fear is public speaking. Number two is death. This means to the average person, if you go to a funeral, you're better off in the casket than doing the eulogy. Okay, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but for me, I do prefer the eulogy. So Dennis kind of touched on this when he was talking about small adventures, but when we think of adventures, our mind often jumps to something that's an adrenaline rush type of experience, like zip lining or deep sea diving or being Ernest Hemingway and going on an African wildlife trek. Or we might also think of people who took great risks in their careers and ended up wildly successful. Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Oprah Winfrey, we can all summon to mind millions of those people. But these are not the stories, the goals, or aspirations that may fuel our own life adventures. We're not on a journey of comparison, and we're not on a journey of competition. We're on an individual journey of evolution, a journey that involves learning more, becoming more, growing more. Becoming more than we are in this present moment. So we must acknowledge that just doing something like overcoming a fear of public speaking is a huge adventure. Just deciding not to go in the left lane right away is a huge adventure for some of us. Fears are powerful, and they impede our opening to greater possibilities. Dr. Holmes wrote this in the Science of Mind text. In the midst of plenty, humanity lives in want because of fear. To overcome fear is the greatest adventure of the mind of man. I thought about this and I thought, you know, that has always been my greatest adventure, overcoming fear. Many is the time when I felt the fear and did it anyway. But as the Bob Dylan song says, but I'm so much older then. I'm younger than that now. But you know, I confront these weird and bizarre fears that pop up seemingly out of nowhere. And it's like that game Whack-A-Mole where you're, God, here comes another one, bop, here comes another one, bop. And these fears can haunt me if I don't pay attention and bring myself consciously back to resting in God. And what I'm noticing that as I age, I have more ridiculous fears, things I never would have dreamed of in my impetuous and risk-taking youth. So I'm going to share one of the most bizarre with you. I'm bearing my soul here, people. I have the dreaded fear of motel bedspreads. I read one too many articles about germs, bed bugs, and bodily fluids being left behind in vacated hotel rooms, and that sealed it for me. Now, this also is very hilarious to me because when I was an educational training consultant years back, I was flying all over the place, and I consciously would penny pinch my food and per diem allowance so that I'd end up netting more money. And that meant that I would end up in some pretty seedy motels. I'll spare you the details, but you might want to imagine neon lights and hourly rates. No. I'm kidding. I'm exaggerating. It wasn't that bad. But you know what? Tom Baudet left many a light on for me. Another dated reference. And guess what? I never in all those years came home with bed bugs or weird diseases. Still today, this weird fear pops up, and I have to confront it. Otherwise, I'll never travel again. Or if I travel, I will have to stay in 4-star places, which means I'm going to have to manifest at a way higher level. Okay, but on a more serious note, this is another fear I have, and this is the fear, this centers around my sweet dog, Pono. I'm a huge dog lover, as many of you know. But my dog, Pono, is on doggy hospice, and he really is declining rapidly. And so I have this fear that I won't be able to bear the pain of this impending loss, even though history shows me that I can and I will walk through it. I've always walked through loss and grief and made it to the other side. I will do it again. But there's that fear. And since it's confession time, I've also been flirting with some fear about my health, because I can go in and out of not feeling real great. But this is probably based on history rather than reality. And neither of these are huge, paralyzing fears, but nevertheless, they impinge on my peace of mind. They need to be uprooted. They need to be released. So what's my recourse when fear comes to call? What pulls me out of fear and back into faith every day? And what helps me to remind myself of my holy connection to Spirit? It is that very act, of course, of returning to Source. It's that very act of stopping to remember my divine heritage. And it's also the act that I'm going to talk about further today, and that is summoning up self-compassion as I take these next steps of my journey. Now, I can make fun of my fears, but you better not. But in truth, I have to love myself through each and every one of them. I must, to keep on moving forward and to evolve. So I'm going to talk, as I said, about the importance of self-compassion as we move through life's adventures of facing fear and personal pain. Because really, we can't evolve at a deeper level until we agree that a spiritual bypass is not helpful when we're in the midst of these twists and turns of life. And it's easy in our teaching, if we're on the surface level of our teaching, it's easy to want to employ that spiritual bypass by just shoving the feelings aside and saying, it's all good, and God is all there is. And that's true. But if we're not allowing ourselves to really feel the pain, the fear, the anger, the grief we may be experiencing in any moment of the day, then we're doing ourselves a great disservice. For some people, just allowing feelings to come forth and to surface is definitely a huge risk and an adventure in faith. But you know what? What happens to that pain, fear, anger, and grief when they're not expressed or they're not fully felt in a healthy way? Well, those unexpressed emotions don't go anywhere. They just store up in our body. And excuse my graphic language, but they not only store up, they fester until we can no longer contain them, and they're expressed somatically through the body. And that could be through a sickness, that could be through a deep depression, that could be through a violent rage, which we're seeing a lot of in this country today. And this will continue until each of us finally learn that our feelings are not as scary or as damaging as the possible repercussions of not allowing them to surface. Okay, but I'm not giving you permission to hang out with these feelings forever and drag them around like heavy baggage. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is it's the feeling that allows for the belief. I'll repeat that. It is the feeling that allows for the release. Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist nun, reminds us that if we begin to get in touch with whatever we feel with some kind of kindness, our protective shells will melt, and we'll find more areas of our lives are workable. So I'm going to teach you a little formula that I learned from the Buddhist teacher Tara Branch, and it's been very helpful to me. I learned about it several years ago, but I kind of forgot about it until I listened to another webinar, and I went, oh, I remember how effective this is. And I've been using it since I listened to that webinar again. And the acronym for this formula or this practice is RAIN, the word RAIN, R-A-I-N, which stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. Recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. So the first is self-evident. We recognize what we're feeling in the moment. We give it a label. We say, I'm really angry. I'm really frightened. And we allow it. We don't try to change it. We let it be. We might say yes. We're saying yes to the inner life that we are experiencing right now. We can admit to ourselves, you know what, this really sucks. That's okay. And we don't tell ourselves that we're wussy or spiritually deficient for having these feelings. That is the recognition and the allowing. And then the I in RAIN stands for investigate. We allow ourselves to be curious about the origins of this feeling. Is there a history? Are there underlying beliefs that are influential? And of course, with my dog dying, there is a history of loss upon loss upon loss, not just dogs, but people. And that's the history. But there's also that other history of moving through loss and learning from it and growing from it and evolving from it. Which one am I going to focus on? Which history? And the history of the hotel bedspreads? Again, reading sensational stuff and taking it in without questioning it. When really, my personal history does not attest to the hotel bedspreads being deadly forces in my life. So as we're investigating, we might ask ourselves, what most wants or needs our attention right now? And one other thing we might also do is try to locate where these feelings are lodged and held captive in the body. Oftentimes, fear is lodged in the throat. Grief is lodged in the heart. You can feel the pain, you feel it, you feel the discomfort. Anger is often lodged in the belly area. So we look for that. And finally, this is the self-compassion piece. We nurture ourselves through tender words and tender touch. And this is where that self-compassion comes alive. This is where we accept our deepest vulnerability and we ask, what does this pain or fear or anger or grief that I'm feeling need most from me? Is it acceptance? Is it forgiveness that I need? Do I need love? Do I need protection? Do I need to feel safe? What is it that will move me through and allow me to release this emotion? And we breathe into those places where we're feeling it in our body. We breathe into our throat, we breathe into our heart, we breathe into our belly, we open up and expand. We touch those places as if we were touching another person, offering caring touch to another person. If my heart is hurting, I've used this example before, but I do it almost daily. And sometimes when I'm praying, just unconsciously, I will hold my heart and I'll say, I love you. I love you. I might say I'm sorry if there's some regret that's stuck there. I might say I'm honoring what you're feeling, and I'm definitely going to say, I'm going to move you through this. When it rains outside, and the rain stops, as it just did this morning, we notice that freshness and that newness in the air. We see the raindrops sparkling and glinting in the sunlight, those drops that are left behind on the greenery, and it's a beautiful, peaceful feeling. And that same thing happens after our internal reign. When we use this acronym, we feel cleansed. We notice the quality of presence that remains, and we are fully able to rest in that space of healing. Because our bodies and our minds and our spirit have been released from the heaviness of those feelings. And in this freedom, we can and do move forward in this adventure called life. And we move forward with the strength of God fully showing up. There's no blockage when we move through these feelings and we go through this process. So the strength of God shows up fully in us and as us. So we might define self-compassion as accepting our pain with love, as we are reminded that there is a sense of shared humanity. We're not the only ones feeling those feelings. And how often do we speak to ourselves as we would to a loved one who's hurting? We may think that showing compassion, we may have been taught this, showing self-compassion is weak or indulgent, when in fact it is one of the healthiest practices we can choose. Dr. Christian Neff spent 10 years researching self-compassion, and she found that people who practice self-compassion are much less likely to be depressed or anxious or stressed, and are much more likely to be happy and optimistic and resilient about their future. In short, better mental health. And these are her words. She says, "The power of self-compassion is not just an idea, it's very real and actually manifests in our bodies. When we soothe our own pain, we are tapping into a mammalian caregiving system. And one important way this caregiving system works is by triggering the release of oxytocin, which is the hormone that gives us increased feelings of trust and calm and safety and generosity and connectedness. And this oxytocin also facilitates the ability to feel warmth and compassion for ourselves. It's released naturally in a variety of social situations, including when a mother breastfeeds her child, or parents interact with young children, or when someone gives or receives a soft, tender caress. And because these thoughts and emotions have the same effect on our body, whether they're directed to ourselves or to others, this research suggests that self-compassion is a powerful trigger for the release of oxytocin and, at the same time, the decrease of cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So when we soothe our painful feelings with the healing balm of self-compassion, not only are we changing our mental and emotional experience, we're also changing our body chemistry. That's why soothing touch is an easy way for us to calm and comfort ourselves when it's needed. And just as a baby responds when it's being lovingly held by its mother, our body responds to the physical gesture of warmth and care, giving from ourselves to ourselves, touching your heart, giving yourself a hug, softly stroking your arm or your face, gently rocking your body. They're all gestures that convey feelings of loving care. Okay, so we're going to do it right. We're just going to do it. We're going to give ourselves a big hug right now. Big, big. Yeah. Gotta admit that feels good, especially during these times when we become so limited in this past year in our ability to give or receive human touch from others. We got to give it to ourselves. When we practice self-compassion, we are more able to demonstrate compassion and forgiveness to others. That's the beauty of this adventure, something that is sorely needed and precious in the world of divisive appearance. This is one way we say yes to life as a holy and a holy experience. This poem is by Martha Postlethwaite. She says, Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours alone to sing falls into your open cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. We create that clearing by acknowledging our vulnerability and caring for ourselves with love. And you know, we give our best to the world when we give our best to ourselves. And when we give our best to ourselves, we're more ready to open our hearts and minds to expansion in this adventure called life. Finding God within ourselves and others and nature and human events begins with our inner communion, the inner communion of our spiritual practice. And then it expands outward to a smile or a kindness extended, or a willingness to expand and learn about new people, places, and things. This adventure begins and ends with consciousness. And every day we have the opportunities to find the divine and deepen our connection to it. In Living Without Fear, Dr. Holmes wrote, "There is an inner urge in our minds to grow, to expand, to break down the barriers of previous limitations, and to ever widen our experience." This persistent urge is a divine influence, and it's an irresistible force, and it constitutes the greatest impulse in human experience. And in this thing called you, Dr. Holmes wrote, "This is the story of your life. Just keep right on knocking at the doorway of your consciousness until every no becomes a yes, every negation an affirmation, and every fear a faith." And how much easier this is to do, how much easier this all becomes when we understand the important role that self-compassion plays in this adventure called life. And so it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Cathy. Very, very, very beautiful and timely message. Thank you.